I'm Cupin, and this is 36 Years, where we talk about Philippine news, democracy, and politics. On May 9, 2022, the Philippines elected as President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. He's the second Marcos to hold the post, the first being his father. The dictator was ousted on February 25, 1986, in what we now call the People Power Revolution. That was 37 years ago. Now, this show talks about how nearly 4 decades after the ouster of the dictator, we elected his son. What does this mean for Philippine democracy? Welcome to 36 Years, available wherever you listen to podcasts and on Rappler's social media pages. This week, we talked to attorney Chel Diokno. He's a human rights lawyer and he's the chairman for the Bantayog ng Mga Bayani Foundation. We talk about how we are meant to commemorate the People Power Revolution. Given that Marcos Jr. is president, we also talk about his own memories and experiences from the dictatorship. We talk about TikTok as well, how to engage with the youth, and also what he reads for leisure and what he reads for not so leisure. That's going to be interesting. So I hope you enjoy this interview as much as I did. Now, on to the interview. Thank you, attorney, for joining us, giving us time for this interview.
Oh, welcome. I'm always happy to talk about interesting things.
Sir, let's start with how did you commemorate the 37th anniversary of the People Power Revolution?
Well, as the chair of the Bantayog, I attended the events in the afternoon of the 25th. Other than that, we also had some other things that we did. EDSA also coincides with my father's birthday and death anniversary. So medyo halo-halo yung mga events na napuntahan ko.
Yeah. Sir, ito medyo obvious question siguro for certain sectors of society, but for some it's not. Why is it important to commemorate the revolution?
We need to remember not just EDSA, but everything that happened during the 14 years that we were under a dictatorship. People tend to look at EDSA in isolation na
Yeah.
nagkaroon na ng people power. They even those who were there may have forgotten the atrocities that happened before the EDSA revolution took place. My memories of that period of time are very vivid because I was only 11 years old when
Yeah.
martial law was declared and 25 when the Marcoses fled Malacañang. And from my perspective as the son of a prominent political detainee who later on, after his release, became one of the first human rights lawyers in the country, I saw firsthand so many things that perhaps others never saw or heard about.
Yeah. Sir, actually, I was gonna talk about that. Na parang, syempre in school, when I was in grade school, high school, we learned about Kapepe, all the heroes of martial law and EDSA, but parang kumbaga pahapyaw lang. And parang hindi ko alam kung good thing or bad thing, pero for the most part, I only learned about like the deeper stories as a journalist because I went to certain areas and I learned of these stories that weren't necessarily in the textbooks. No, so I want you to walk us through when you were a young boy. Did you quite understand then the gravity of what was happening, not just to your family but to the whole nation when martial law was declared?
Yes, even as a boy of 11 years old, I was already aware of what was happening even before martial law was declared. There was a lot of social unrest at that time, and the youth, especially of our country, were really making their voices heard. They were not happy with how government was handling affairs. When martial law was declared, the freedoms that we were so regularly enjoying were just suddenly taken away. And
Yeah.
that was an eye opener, especially for me, because uh, it was a shocker for us to have soldiers suddenly appear on the evening of the 22nd of September 1972 and take my father away for no legal reason at all. And
Yeah.
that was the very first time yun ang unang panahon natikman ko yung sobrang pait na lasa ng inostisya. At
Yeah.
that was very traumatic as on a personal level. At the same time, it made us realize what was happening all over the country. During the 2 years that my father was detained, life
Mm.
sort of got into a limbo. Even my
Yeah.
studies were disrupted. But at the same time, our house became the hub of a lot of people who slowly but surely were fighting the dictatorship. So
Yeah.
I was privy to a lot of things that other people were not aware of.
Yeah. I can't imagine, sir, kasi naalala ko back in, I think, 2015 or 2016, checking the year now. Yeah, 2016, we actually visited the Aquino Diokno Memorial in Nueva Ecija, and I just remember how haunting walking around the detention center was. Um, and I wonder, like, how were you processing that? And as a young child, and how does it differ now that you're much older, understanding the events, what was happening around you, what was happening in your own home during those years?
Well, I was already in the adolescent stage at that time, and
Mm,
I had already been sort of socially aware because of what happened to my father. So
yeah.
when I was 11 and up to the time he was released at the age when I was 13, that
Mm-mm.
was when I realized how difficult it was to be under an authoritarian type of government.
Yeah.
Where it was also something when my father was released at,
Mm.
in 1974. I had already somehow decided that I would become a lawyer, so that when he
Wow.
would attend court hearings, if I was at home, I would always ask to go with him. So I
Yeah.
got to observe some of the very prominent military court cases that had been filed by the Marcos regime against the prominent opposition members. Ang mga kaso noon, mga subversion, rebellion. So at that age na I was I witnessed so much of those proceedings that it made me realize what was really happening in the country, and
Yeah.
that made me even more determined to continue to become a lawyer and to enter human
Yeah.
rights.
Yeah, side questions are actually, parang yun nga, nabanggit mo nga, parang as a young boy, exposed ka na, or you had a very unique and privileged, in a way, din, a perspective, no, of how the law operates, or the law does not operate well in the Philippines. Through the years, sir, how do you not, kung baga, paano ka hindi nawawalan ng gana? Paano ka na hindi nawawalan ng pag-asa? Yun nga, yung parang mga kapalpakan sa sistema ng bansa.
You're not the first one to ask me that. I don't really know how to answer that question. I think it's just that I I am determined to make sure that there is justice in the country. And
Yeah.
having seen so much injustice in all the years of my life, I know that it's wrong and I cannot just abide by it. I cannot
Mm,
remain silent and not do anything in the face of all of that. Part of the inspiration I get probably is from the situation of my father, because
yeah.
when he started being fighting for human rights in 1974 when he was released, there were only a handful of lawyers who were
Yeah.
willing to take on those kinds of cases.
Yeah.
Kaya they were like voices in the wilderness na marami pa rin takot nung panahon na yon.
Yeah. I mean, arguably, sir, hanggang ngayon, that's kind of the case of human rights defenders in the Philippines, in a way.
It's funny how that has come full circle,
Yeah.
because after EDSA, when we promulgated the 1987 Constitution, and which really prominently featured human rights, we made a lot of gains in terms of the human rights movement. We passed a lot of
Mm-mm.
good laws that domesticated international treaties on human rights. We were even at the point of working with the police and the military in terms of training them on human rights and how to conduct human rights based policing and so on. But all of that changed in 2016, and
Yeah.
that's what I'm saying. It really has come full circle.
Yeah, it must have been incredibly frustrating to see that happen in real time.
Frustrating, and at the same time a bit saddening, and at the same time it also made me a bit angry because
Yeah,
I thought that that would never happen again in the country,
yeah,
and to see it
yeah.
happen and to see the hundreds of people being killed every day during the start of the war on drugs, and then the rest of it, the attacks on the media and
Mm-mm.
other freedoms, that really did not make my day, put it that way.
Kumbaga sir, parang nabaliktad nga yung mundo eh, no? Yung norms na tama na iniisip natin dati, parang hindi lang siya na-challenge, pero nabaliktad in a way under the 6 years of Rodrigo Duterte.
Yes, and we do not see any change in that during this administration,
Yeah.
insofar as human rights are concerned.
Yeah, definitely not. In fact, like the president has barely spoken about human rights. At most, he's only talked about it in the context of the ICC and Rodrigo Duterte, and his stance is similar to the previous administration.
Yes, that's exactly right. And that
Yeah,
in itself is frustrating. The
yeah,
old arguments that they keep resurrecting about, oh, that's an attack on our sovereignty and all that. Lumang tugtugin na yan. And it's so clear that when we agreed to the Rome Statute, in that
mm,
respect, we agreed to respect the criminal court, the ICC.
mm. So you're talking about the current president naman, si President Bongbong Marcos. He said on the anniversary of the People Power Revolution, uh, I'm gonna check his exact quote, but kumbaga may offer siya, quote unquote, of reconciliation, and a lot of people have pointed this out na there is no reconciliation without apologies, and he has clearly not what do you make of that? No, parang ito yung first People Power Revolution anniversary natin under the second Marcos president. That was his statement. Nagpadala pa siya ng flower sa monument. But then, like, there is no follow through. There's no actual admission that this happened. This is how much we owe the Philippines and the Filipino taxpayer and the Filipino.
It's not just apology. To me, there
Yeah.
really can be no genuine reconciliation without accountability. And
Mm-mm.
that's the thing that we have never seen as far as the atrocities during the Marcos dictatorship are concerned.
Yeah. Yeah. So on that note din also, no, parang sa Bantayog nga, there's a wall of remembrance. The late Kapepe's name is there. The names of thousands, hundreds of heroes of the martial law years and beyond are there. There are monuments. So we do have monuments all around the Philippines reminding us of what happened then. But then you have someone like Senator Amy Marcos, and I point her out because she is the sister of the current president, albeit medyo distanced from the president yung kalagayan ni Senator Marcos, because she said recently, supposedly quoting her son, the governor, Matthew Manotoc, na hindi na daw kasi daw uso, quote unquote, or hindi na relevant ang people power sa millennial generation. At least that was his claim. How do you make of that, and like how do you think we're doing in terms of remembering, in terms of commemorating and making sense of what happened just 37 years ago, if you think about it? It's not such a distant past.
I think the disinformation that has really spread on the internet and the historical revisionism have seriously affected how some parts of our youth remember that period in our history.
Hmm.
But I am, however, um, happy to know, and in my interactions with the younger set of our population, that many of them are now remembering, and they are now realizing what happened during that time. I'm talking of our youth who are now at the age of between 15 to 24.
Yeah, yeah.
Marami na sa kanila ang talagang they're not just curious, they really want to know what happened during that period of time, and they listen. Yeah, it's a good opportunity, I think, for those of my generation at least to set the record
Mm-mm,
straight and to let them
mm-mm.
know the real story of the dictatorship.
Yeah. I've said this before on the show, no, na parang it's strange to me how my generation, the millennials, so millennials now nasa range namin 40s, to late 20s na kami na parang hindi ganoon kalayo sa amin yung revolution sa totoo lang. Pero we don't have actual memories of it. And it's strange to me how far removed it can feel to us sometimes.
Alam mo ba, kayo rin kasi yung naging target ng first wave of historical revisionism. I recall in the early 2000s, that's when the videos started surfacing about,
Mm,
napakaganda naman ng martial law, wala naman
yeah,
nangyaring tama nung time na yon. And those
yeah,
were specifically targeted at the millennials.
yeah,
Kaya I'm not surprised that there are people of that age sector who really don't know what happened or don't know the truth about it.
yeah. Because I remember when I was younger nga, parang yung tinuro sa amin, nagka-martial law. Pero I don't even recall being taught what martial law actually meant or what it what the consequences of it were. Parang kumbaga hapyaw lang talaga siya na nagka-martial law. Tapos parang yung next lesson, nagka-revolution na. So parang parang kumbaga ano lang siya, talagang blip lang siya kumbaga sa lesson namin. Mas matagal pa siguro yung time, mas mahaba pa yung time na nilaan namin sa pag-aral ng American War or even the Spanish War in our history classes in high school and grade school, which it's not really surprising na a lot of people my age are quite vulnerable to lies about the martial law years.
Part of it is also that the point you mentioned, that it
Mm,
doesn't receive much attention in school, and at the same
yeah,
time, part of it I think is also how history is taught, because
yeah,
from what I have gathered from some of the young people, they're taught to
mm,
memorize dates, but they're
yes,
not really taught about the significance of what happened and its effect on the country. Kaya
yeah,
parang yung, instead of the substance of our what has happened in our country, they just have to remember dates so that they can pass the exams. At
yeah,
yun, nakakabahala yun dahil
yeah.
I don't think that's the right way we should be learn our history.
Parang if anything, journalism and being a journalist has taught me it's that stories compel people. And you're right, we didn't know the story. We only knew na, okay, sa araw na ito, parang ito yung nangyari on February 23. Tapos ito yung nangyari sa 24. Ito yung nangyari sa 25. Pero parang wala talagang, there was no effort to make us understand why this was happening, who these people were, or why it was significant na this person did this or this person did that. So, um,
And that's
yeah,
why Bantayog is so important. And that's also why I
yeah,
think a lot of young people are really interested and wanting to know the stories of martial law, because it's when you hear from the people who were there what happened and what was done to them, that's
yeah,
the only time you really you realize, ganun pala yung nangyari noon.
yeah. It's hard to look away when a fellow human being is speaking in front of you. Hopefully, sana hindi naman tayo umabot sa punto na may kausap ka na or may kumakausap na sa harap mo at hindi ka pa rin, parang you still refuse to empathize or you are unable to empathize with their stories.
That's so true.
Yeah. Sir, napansin ko nga parang as I am a millennial but I am quite uncomfortable engaging on platforms like TikTok. You are not. You are quite comfortable, or at least you're playing around with a medium. Um from the years that you've been playing around with, using social media, engaging with the youth, not just like blasting things onto them, no, pero talagang may engagement na nangyayari. Like, how do you think we should best kasi I'm not a youth anymore, sadly. How should we be engaging with the youth given na yun nga, parang it's such a toxic world, plus there's this information all over the internet.
I think we have to find ways that to really get their attention and to convey the message that we want to convey.
Yeah.
That's one of the reasons why I really have a social media presence, because you know the data shows that we go on the internet
Yeah.
more than most other countries. I think I saw a
Yes.
study that said that we go online around 11 hours a day. That much. We are the social media capital of the world, and at the same time, according to a Facebook executive way back in
Mm,
2015, we are patient
yeah.
zero in the epidemic of disinformation that has gripped the world.
Mm,
Kaya sa akin, if we don't get into that space, we will surrender that space to the trolls and to the architects of disinformation. Ayoko mangyari yon. I think we need to have more and more people occupying that space who are ready to speak truth to power.
yeah. And to add to what you said, sir, yun nga, parang I think the latest survey pegs na nearly half of Filipinos get their news from the internet and Facebook, as opposed to just like 6 years ago, where the leading source was the quote unquote traditional legacy media, so TV, print. Now it's online. And it's not even necessarily, news websites like Rappler, GMA News Online. It's social media. So it's mga kaibigan mo, mga influencers, quote unquote, or vloggers who are out there. A lot of them are not spewing out the truth, unfortunately.
Kaya maraming nadadali dahil dyan
Yeah.
nga. It's a new phenomenon that we must deal with and adjust in terms of making sure we get our messages across.
Yeah. But so is it not frustrating for you, because you've been the subject of, the usual online attacks, diba? Na parang from everything from your stance to the way you look, it's that ridiculous online. Like how do you go about that, or is that also a function of the wisdom the wisdom that you have from the years that you've been engaging in the Philippines?
Hindi ko naman pinapansin yan eh. To me, it's a distraction and I
Yeah.
don't want to get distracted. Part of it is also the fact that, I've been a trial lawyer for a long time. And among trial lawyers, we have this understanding na bawal ang pikon. Hindi ka pwede mapikon sa court. And dala-dala ko yan. That's part of what I have as a public person.
Yeah. Sir, second to the last question. Yeah, given the horrible disinformation that's out there, that seems to be a problem that's not one entity can solve truthfully. And yun nga, parang itong weird na pag-reach out ni President Marcos, but not quite, on the event of the first People Power anniversary under him. How should we, and by we, pwede siguro ihati yun sa government and civil society, how should we be commemorating an event like the People Power Revolution?
I think we should be remembering not only the events that resulted in our regaining our democracy, meaning the days
Mm,
leading up to February 25, but the
mm,
entire period of martial law.
yeah,
In fact,
yeah,
I regret that we never called it martial law in terms of how we look back at it. But when we think about that period, we always use the word martial law. But in
mm,
reality, it was a dictatorship, pure and simple.
yeah,
And
yeah,
how much I had hoped that we would remember it as a dictatorship because that's really what
yeah,
it was. Kaya
yeah,
ako, nasasayangan din ako na pag pinag-usapan natin yung bahagi ng kasaysayan na yan, ang tawag
yeah.
natin na martial law. Dapat naman, let's call it what
Mm,
it is and call it a dictatorship. That's how I think we should remember it. Because
that's
that
an
explains
interesting.
everything. It explains how so much
Yeah,
money was plundered. It explains
yeah,
how so many human rights atrocities took place. It explains
yeah,
how the rule of law was destroyed and all our freedoms were taken away. Pag sinabi
yeah,
natin martial law, hindi, walang dalang ano yun eh, wala siyang dalang ganun na meaning.
yeah. And the propagandists twist it to justify it. Kasi, di ba, parang they use the technical, or, they use the explanations then and explanations now, until now, that persist for declaring martial law in the first place.
That's right.
Yeah. So this show is about making sense of what's happening around us, especially in politics and news. Ito naman not necessarily related to the People Power anniversary, but given all of the things that you do, as a human rights lawyer, um, working against disinformation, especially about the dictatorship of Ferdinand Marcos Sr. What do you do? Do you read? Do you watch movies to make sense of what's going on around you?
Well, yes, I love to read. I love to watch films, and I love to interact with people. So that's
Mm-mm.
really what occupies a lot of my time. It's being it's a wonderful time actually to be alive, with so many things happening, not just in our country but in the world. But it's also very challenging and sometimes frustrating and exasperating, especially when we talk about good governance in our country.
Yeah.
When we speak about the most basic things, that sovereignty resides in the people, their authority comes from us.
Mm.
Pagang nakikita natin yung kabaliktaran nun. But at the
Yeah.
same time, it gives me the it really spurs me to right that wrong, and to make sure that when we say something, we really mean it.
Mm. Sir, medyo napopause ako dun sa It's a Wonderful Time to Be Alive kasi if you open like Twitter or even TikTok or Facebook, like a lot of people might feel the exact different emotion. But I wonder, so what books are you reading right now to inspire you perhaps to not lose hope in what's going on all around us?
Well, first of all, it is really any period in time naman will have adversity. And to me, adversity is not something we should shy away from. Adversity is really what sharpens us and refines us as human beings. So that's why I say, this time is it's quite a challenge, and if you look at it that way, then at least you won't get depressed and you won't want to leave the country. In terms of books, well, I read anything from fiction to nonfiction. Lately, I've been reading about the military bases agreement, the mutual defense treaty, because of the what's happening in the news.
Mm.
Uh, but if it's just for entertainment or when I want to relax, generally I just go to my library, look at the pocketbook that perhaps I had read before, and reread it, or find the new book and read it. So yeah.
The comfort and security of an old familiar book. No, thank you again, attorney, for your time. We're gonna link resources to the things that you discussed, including resources about Bantayog, resources about the dictatorship of Ferdinand Marcos Sr., and even the readings, the less leisurely readings that Attorney Jokno mentioned. We're gonna link to that para masabayan niyo siya sa pag-aaral niya sa current discussion on EDCA and the Philippines. So, salamat ulit, attorney, for your time.
Thank you.
And hope to see you around soon.
Yes, thank you too.
This has been 36 years. Thank you for watching. For the latest updates on Philippine news and politics, really, check out Rappler.com, especially updates, if any, on EDCA, as Attorney Jokno mentioned earlier. Check out the Nation section of Rappler. Also, make sure to check out Rappler's other shows. We cover everything from news, from sports to entertainment, even K pop. This has been Cupin. Thank you for watching.